Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polke, and I am the host of the journey. And as many of you know, the journey is about stories of transformation. And as we know, that transformation, one of the key elements of transformation and the transformational stories is that we've endured or experienced some type of ordeal or some type of setback. And in this particular episode and this show is really about how to an opportunity to share about that experience of that ordeal, and most importantly, what did you learn about yourself that you wouldn't have learned if this ordeal wouldn't have happened. And today we have a special guest with us, Mandolen Mull, and is joining us today. She is in the Rockford, Illinois area right now, and she's working at Rockford University. And I just recently saw in the last couple months that you were one of the individuals that were identified of 40 people that you should know under 40. And that caught my eye for numerous reasons. But I read your profile in there and the story that you had there as well. So, Madeline, welcome to the journey.
Thank you so very much, Kevin. I appreciate it.
So, well, one of the things I ask my guests when they first come on is just to kind of get to know you a little bit as a person. What does Madeline do for fun when you have an opportunity and when you're not working or not studying? What do you do for fun?
Great question. The answer would be work.
Mhm.
I I don't know that I do anything really that well other than work. I do enjoy reading. I have a great passion for reading. And I have two very badly behaving puppies. So we'll see if they behave themselves right now. I'm from home today. Got a basset hound named Bilbo Baggins and a little rescue terrier named Griffin. And so they sometimes slow me down to read a book. So that's usually a nice time when I get that chance.
Sure. And if you, so if I went into your bookshelf or your library, what types of books would I see?
So I have vast ambitions to be a polymath one day. So I like to know a little bit about everything. So you will find just absolutely a cornucopia of different genres, styles of writing, different authors. Right here I've got Jane Austen and Walt Whitman. Um, Over here I've got James Clear of Atomic Habits. I've got one on the mind gut connection for the microbiome. I'm yeah, so yeah, of course I've got a ton of leadership books. So yeah, you kind of take your pick there. So it's pretty interesting.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, I'm probably the same way with the books that I read, even though I probably most enjoy autobiographies or history and autobiography. But I probably have a similar wide variety of books that I read and collect, and probably similar to the podcasts I listen to as well as the music I listen to. So it depends
Yeah,
on where I'm at is what I want to listen to or read or whatever it may be. So very seldom am I
absolutely.
going to have very seldom am I going to be just reading one book at a time. I'm going to be reading multiple books at a time. So
That's me. Yeah, unfortunately, I have books in every room in the house. I feel like sometimes I'm like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, right? I just walk around the house with a different book. So and all of them have different bookmarks in them. So yeah, it's I one of these days I'll finish one of them, but usually it's moving around.
sure, sure. So tell us a little bit about where your background and where you're from. I noticed that there's a non-Rockfordian accent. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I was born in Fort Worth, Texas. My mother was an Air Force colonel's daughter. My father had lived all kind of around Texas. And so I claim Texas is home, but nobody ever believes that when they hear my accent. I'm I've done some world travels. I'm mainly in the UK. Um, and so uh, I, there are times you might hear me say Ireland is home, but my friends and family back in Texas still claim me for the most part. Um, and although I've been in Rockford for the last 4 years, I really love being in the Midwest. I realized Midwest nice was a real thing, and not like what we have down in the South where we say we're nice, but we're not really.
Gotcha. So what did bring you to Rockford, or how did you end up coming to Rockford? So what was the story there?
Yeah, so I somehow found my way into academia, which was never my plan. I did my undergrad degree in political science. I was going to be the first female politician in my family. I'm third generation politician in my family. That was the goal. And then I realized that I was a political operative, and I realized that I have thin skin and I don't like when people don't like me. And that was very hard for me to. So I graduated early from the University of Mayheart and Baylor, kind of found myself rapidly getting promoted. I enjoyed being a leader, but I was really scared that I was going to fail my people. I just thought, I've been given a gift and nobody's taught me how to use it. And if I'm not careful and I don't do things to take care of me, I'm going to hurt people just because of my own ignorance. So I decided to go get my MBA. I'm back at my alma mater, Mary Hardin Baylor. And it was there that I realized there's actually a phenomenon for that called the Peter Principle that says we get promoted to our level of incompetency. Basically, we get promoted based on the performance of our past work with the expectation we'll be successful in that new role, oftentimes not being trained for that new role. And I thought, that's I'm getting an MBA. And so I'm got my MBA. I graduated from the McLean College of Business there at UMHB, and I got a job at McLean Company. I was identified as a hypo. I was supposed to get a year's worth of operations experience there in their flagship location. So dusty warehouse of 100 and about 116-degree warehouse with no AC. I oversaw the loading dock of 160 men. They were all men on my team, doing manual labor that I have no prayer of being able to do. And I was a 3 a.m. conversation where I asked my guys, haven't you thought about where you'll be in 10 years? And he said, no. And I said, well, yeah, but if I get promoted, don't, you should take my job. And he goes, well, I'd have to have a college degree, and I don't know anybody who went to college. So I've gone twice. So I started mentoring, helping him get back into school. And eventually he brought me the job description at Tarleton State University, and it was a hybrid role. I was going to run the business program there at that satellite location in Waco, Texas, and also get to teach. And I thought, oh, I don't know that I mean, imposter syndrome was real. And I went in to teach, and I got to teach adult learners. It was, we were only teaching the junior, senior students. And I realized how much my work experience was resonating with the students. So I decided to get my PhD, and I just am very faith oriented. So I thought, well, God, I'll apply wherever, and if you open the door, I won't question it. And when he opened the door to Rockford, I said, are you sure? Nah. And it's really cold up there. And my family all thought that I was nuts for leaving. Nobody in Texas understands why you would ever leave Texas, is the thing. And I came to Rockford. Within my first year, I was the director over the degree completion program, and then the team elected me as the chair. So I've been the chair of the Peoria School of Business for the last 4 years now. So it's been a whirlwind.
Well, congratulations. So regarding what you're doing with the school of business at Rockford University, kind of what would you like kind of envision where you want to go with it, and then how has some of your life journey kind of reflect on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I got asked today something about this quiet quitting. I'm in, and everybody wants to know about the of course, before that, it was all the millennials. Why are the millennials demanding all of these things and meaningful work? And I said, well, it's because it's always been that way. And the analogy that I always use is, when was the last time that somebody hit their metrics and that their supervisor said, as a reward for all that great work that you've done, I want you to do 20% less next quarter. It doesn't happen. We keep pushing people further and further and further. We have a broken system, and we're breaking people in the process. We act like people are machines, forgetting that even well-oiled, high quality, well-maintained machines break down with overuse. And I think we're seeing that very much in our work environments today. I think we're seeing it. I think it started with business. We're seeing it in education. We're seeing it in healthcare for sure. And so where I see the vision of the Peoria School of Business going is this idea of, how are we really stopping ourselves from some of those metric-oriented type pushes, recognizing what they are, knowing that that's a tool we use, but are we using it with instructions and with intention? And how are we developing our people? Whether you're an accountant, whether you're in finance, whether you're marketing analyst, whatever it might be that you're coming out of the Peoria School of Business, you've got to be collaborative with your colleagues. You've got to be able to understand that the work environment, we're going to get a lot further when we collaborate rather than we see everything as a competition. And that's the approach that my team and I have started building in the Peoria School of Business over the last several years. It's resonated greatly with our students, with community members. And it's, I think it's different than what a lot of people expected in the business world, that we were going to be kind of, dog eat dog. Those days are over. It's not sustainable. And I think most of my students will tell you the goal is sustainable success. I tell them, I don't care about your next promotion. I care about you being able to put food on your table and provide for your family and have the quality of life you want for the rest of your life. Sustainability is critical there. So that's what we're trying to produce: robust, empathetic business leaders who will be able to go out and be agile in the workforce, be critical thinkers, challenge assumptions, and be able to support and develop their colleagues and team members.
So, and there's a probably 100,000 different things that you just talked
I
about
give
that
you a lot there.
yeah, well, I'm just thinking of all the different things, having, you know, I used to be a competitive athlete, football player, wrestler, bodybuilder,
Yeah.
and then taking that same template that I used to win a national championship and state titles, and then turned that into being a therapist, and then later turned that into when I opened up KP 21 years ago. And so there was that mindset. Now it's my primary role now is not clinical work anymore. It's mostly leadership development. And so
Right.
so many things I could resonate with. I mean, I remember the excitement that I would get as the end of the month would come, and I would
Mhm.
then get a chance to then look back and reflect on how KP had done, let's say March of whatever, right?
Right.
And then very quickly recognize that then there was April 1st,
Right.
and it started all over again. And or that I was, I grew up in a blue collar family, and my dad was a factory worker, and so it was always, he never worked a 40-hour week. It was always 50 to 60 hours a week. So then as a clinical therapist, I just assumed full time meant, well, then I have to see 40 clients a week.
Right.
And so that was my normal. And so you just figure out how you do direct care for 40 clients a week, because that is the number, the standard. Where then I found out, someone told me, no, as a general rule, therapists are supposed to see 25 clients full time, and then you then have all this, to do paperwork. And I, though that mindset helped me to be very successful,
Mhm.
and then maybe even outpace some other individuals, it also, there's many times where there was um, a lack of fulfillment. There was the
Right.
grind, but
Yeah.
there was all these false summits that
Yeah.
would happen, and so so a lot of things that you just talked about was not my experience in school in the early 90s.
Right.
That was not my experience, let alone, they never taught social workers to be business oriented, at all. But so let me ask you
They didn't
then.
teach business people to be empathetic either. So
Sure,
we're working
sure.
backward.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you say that because when I first started KP was when I probably got my first significant business consultant job, which now today we would talk about, it'd be more like a executive coaching. I did some work with which now is Collins Aerospace,
Mhm.
and I had no idea, leadership, Dan Goldman's work with leadership development versus management. And I had no idea what that really meant. But very quickly, I'm like, oh, this is just psychology.
Yeah,
This leadership development, leadership books these were books on psychology. They just use different words.
right,
And similar to like when I was doing sports psychology, I'm like, this is the same stuff, it's just different words. And
right.
that intrigued me. Besides the fact that I wanted to do well in that position, it intrigued me because it was just reframing some of the things that I was already doing.
Right. Yeah, and I think I see a hunger and a craving of that in the workplace that I make the joke all the time. I go, well, I don't do anything special. I just do things that aren't supposed to be done in the business realm, which is talk about empathy and talking about developing your people and caring about them and helping them find meaningful work, right? And talking about their totality that they bring, their holistic being that they bring to the work, and and really eschewing the idea of work-life balance, which I hate. I just think that doesn't exist. It's a misnomer. Let's quit saying it. It's not a real thing. It's like trying to act like both those things are equal. They're not. Life is so much heavier than just the work bucket. And so I say, yeah. And then I see people in their work environments just lean forward. My nephew, I overheard him going, I don't know what my aunt does, but she's like a big professor or whatever. She does like some really cool stuff. She helps people who feel stuck in their jobs. And I thought, way to go, 15-year-old. Like, okay. So I was like, we'll go with that. Sure, we'll go with that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that being able to his observation or overhearing about what you were talking about, and obviously the passion you have about doing it, he's probably picked up on that and utilized his own language to describe it, which is probably
Right.
more clear than if it was written by an MBA. So
Right.
so so
Very true.
well, Madeline, I'm guessing, and I know you shared a little bit with me, is that similar to what I was saying, that the bucket called life is definitely going to have more weight in it than
Right.
the bucket called work. And
Mhm.
even for some of us who may, impersonate a workaholic at times, even though, and we have maybe a higher tolerance for a larger load of work, because of training, because of experience, whatever it may be. But when life comes in, it definitely weighs heavier, right? It's an exponential weight that is placed on us. And so when you think about some different experiences along your life journey, which includes work that's happened, how have you noticed that made the work that you're doing even more important?
Well, so it's interesting because I would say at the pinnacle of my career, when we looked at those summits that you referred to earlier, I'm I have had some pretty devastating health issues happen along the pathways. I've always been a high performer. I'm ambitious oriented. I'm more achievement oriented, probably rather than ambition. I'm, but I, so I was in my first, I was in a graduate program in I was studying political science, running my first uh, healthcare clinic. I'm right out of college, brand new manager, and I got sick and I didn't know what was going on. And later, after a whole bunch of tests, I got diagnosed with severe Crohn's disease. I have a interesting component of Crohn's disease where it's pretty invasive, and it's a pretty aggressive form of Crohn's. Despite that, I kept working. I kept, it was a big transition to think I'm going to be sick the rest of my life. And versus I can just take, a Z-Pack and I'll be okay in a couple of, days or weeks. But realizing I was going to be sick the rest of my life. And at first I struggled with that a little bit. I was still pursuing my graduate degree. I was still running satellite location, trying to find myself as a leader. And so I realized that, it was a lot less about vanity and a lot more about sanity, in the sense that I had to find kind of the meaning of what was I gonna get off the mat and get after it. And so I had changed careers, had been headhunted from another organization, again, was climbing the corporate ladder there. Everything was going really well. And I started my MBA program. I had been married. My husband and I got married, and we were just shy of a year. We found out we were pregnant. We're super excited. And I lost the baby. And then I had 9 surgeries in 4 months. That made it to where I could not have children, and my husband moved out, and so I kept working. You asked earlier what I like to do. Some would call it a coping mechanism. I would call it sanity. No, and so I kept working. I continued to climb the ladder. I went, and then while I was getting my PhD, I'm carrying a very heavy workload, about 4 times the workload of my colleagues. Again, I say that not in an egotistical way. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but in a sense of that's what drives me. I've always wanted to do more. And I was teaching class one day, noticed my hands were starting to shake, didn't think too much about it. People had noticed that I was kind of stumbling, dragging my right leg behind me, didn't think too much about it. Thought I was just tired. I was getting a PhD. I was carrying this heavy workload. I had a 3-hour commute every day. This made sense. I was going to be tired. And I went into work one morning and was trying to talk to a colleague, and I couldn't talk. I had words in my head, but my mouth was not coordinating. They thought I was having a stroke. I went to hospital. We had spinal taps. We had all kinds of tests done, and I got diagnosed with 2 forms of dystonia. And dystonia occurs, essentially, it's damage to the brain, and it causes muscle contractions. And those muscle contractions can be spasms, or they can be fixed. And so it'll curl up, and I can just kind of stay curled up for a bit. I was told that within 5 years, I would be severely disabled. I wouldn't be able to walk, talk, or feed myself. And I thought, well, I'm getting a PhD. That doesn't sound like something I want to do. So I said, how do I fix this? And the doctor said, we really don't know. We don't know a lot about this. They thought maybe it was connected to my Crohn's. They weren't entirely sure. And so I threw everything at it. I knew I was going to be on medications that were going to suppress the neural activity, kind of make me depressed, which is not my natural habitat. I was having to stay away from people a little bit more because I just wasn't able at that time yet. I hadn't been adjusted to these new muscle contractions. I was walking with a cane, all that kind of stuff. And so I thought, you're taking me away from people, which I love. I'm up against it. So we banned all negative things in my home. My husband and I did, and we watched Hallmark movies. I wasn't even allowed to watch my beloved Texas Rangers because they break my heart all the time. So I read a lot of Mitch Albom, Max Luciano books. It was we had fantastic support, and I continued to get my PhD. My husband would drive me 4 hours every 3 weekends to sit through 16 hours of doctoral statistics, and come back. And I graduated in 3 years with my PhD. I'd come here. So that 5-year diagnosis in October will be have been 6 years ago. And so, uh, I still sometimes I will, my speech will slur just a little bit, my muscles will get a little tense, things like that. But most people don't notice it at all. And most people notice that I have Crohn's disease. And clearly, I came to Rockford University. I I became, like I said, within the first year I was here, I was promoted twice in leadership roles. Um, I still, I'm non-tenured. I go up for tenure next year. So I'm still consulting, I'm still publishing research, I'm teaching, advising, all of those types of things as well. While managing doctor's appointments each week, those kinds of things. So, yeah, I think, you talked about resiliency. How do and how did I what was my fuel for all of that? I won't lie and say that those early years right after the Crohn's diagnosis, I was on the mat a bit. I stayed on the mat a little bit. I thought if the world would stop and give me a good pity party, it was going to be a good one. I was going to make it great. But once I started to realize, and it was really something very small. I mean, it truly was. It was the idea of, I noticed that I would look in the mirror and tell myself, "You look sick." And I thought, I'm telling myself that, I'm speaking that into existence. I'm not going to live that way. So I started doing little things. I didn't have any energy, but I just thought, this is with me for the rest of my life. So I'm going to find ways to make this work for me. So it's little things like I'm wearing my favorite perfume, wearing my grandmother's jewelry. Going back to, it wasn't vanity, it was sanity. And so trying to align pieces that felt like touchstones for me. Where were some anchoring touchstones that I could feel a little bit of confidence or a little bit of strength that would help me move forward? And after a while, those pieces started to really form a really tight puzzle for me, and a tight foundation. And then when I had lost the baby, and when I had the surgeries and the dystonia, all of that came along, and I thought, I've been here before. I really did. It was tough in the sense of, dadgummit, I'm okay, let's go again. But I thought, I've been here before. And in the sense that I don't know what this diagnosis or what this situation is going to carry out, but I'm going to trust my wings. And I tell my students all the time that quote that says, "A bird on a branch is not concerned with the branch breaking, because its trust isn't on the branch, it's in its wings." And I always tell my students, trust your wings, give yourself a fighting chance, take a bet on yourself. And what I knew was, I've been scrappy before. Whatever it looks like in this situation, context is going to be different. I'm going to have to appreciate that, what got me here won't necessarily get me to the next stage, but I need to trust my wings because I'm stronger than I think. And I see those those milestones in my life as touchstones themselves. I don't see them as stumbling blocks. They're definitely stepping stones, but they're keystones to a lot of my identity, a lot of when things kind of get to me sometimes, because I do have a pretty hyper and personality style, and we call the team calls me Ginger Ninja. When I get feisty or scrappy on things, I learned to not be so worked up over the trivial, because I go back and think about the times things were big, and how we navigated through those. So I think it's made me more robust. Being able to handle that, and I would say probably, although I would never wish this on someone, but I was able to comfort. I had, because I share my story pretty publicly, which in the beginning I was afraid to do. And then I thought, well, I didn't know anybody who had Crohn's. I'd never heard of dystonia before. I thought, I'm going to share it. Maybe I'll help reduce the stigma of that. That I can still be highly successful and do all of these things while having these invisible illnesses. But I had a former student several years ago who got diagnosed with dystonia. And what they told me was, "Dr. Mull, when the doctor told me that I have dystonia, I was so much more comforted, and I wasn't as afraid because I knew you had it and I see what you do.
Mm.
And you know, me getting past my fear of hiding my story or my shame, that kind of like, I don't want people to think that I'm not qualified or I'm not good enough or I can't handle things. I don't want people to discredit me before giving me a chance, right? By getting past that ego, by getting past that fear, I was able in that moment, at least through my story, to offer comfort to someone who was scared. Um, that that is pretty powerful, pretty empowering and pretty powerful. Yeah, so that's a lot there.
No, no, no. That's wonderful because I could go in a lot of different directions with that. I mean, being a social worker, specifically being a school social worker, we,
Right.
part of the experience of learning why behind certain civil rights movements, why certain things within the school system regarding special education laws, certain things, and it the special ed law originally came out of the American Disabilities Act, and that was based on
Mhm.
handicapping conditions, and a handicapping condition is different than a disability. And
Yeah.
but the whole idea behind it is that just because someone has either a handicapping condition or a disability doesn't mean that they shouldn't have the same opportunity for the learning experience, which also
And
then
it's
care.
tough. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say, this is something I was talking about with somebody the other day. We were doing a DEI type training, and the speaker was phenomenal. But so much was focused on race and gender, and not a lot on ability. And I had just the night before read something that talked about. It was a doctor had written in the book and said something about women of childbearing age, and I thought, well, I am a woman and I am of childbearing age, but ability is the third thing. And oftentimes ability is not as necessarily considered. And I said something to a friend about that later. And I said, it's been all these years and I still, I have two ADA defined disabilities. And I really recoil for a long time by saying that I had a disability. I've just recently started to embrace it. And I had a friend say, I still struggle with it, and my friend is legally blind. And I thought, because we see accommodations as almost an albatross instead of an empowering component, we see it as something that's kind of something we should be ashamed of. And because a lot of times in the school districts, people with disabilities, I have yet to see in the HR realm, HR training focused on neurodiversity. And the fact that we have a lot of our employees right now in their 30s and 40s getting diagnosed as neurodiverse, and they didn't even know it, let alone their colleagues know how to interact with them. Most of the time we were segregated in school, so we don't know how to interact with people who have some type of disability, whether it's a visible one or an invisible one. So yeah, unfortunately that stigma is really heavy still on ability. And this idea of how are you, and I'm certainly not the spokesperson for it all, I'm just the spokesperson for Mandolen and Mull. But I think it's really interesting, and I hope we can start to move the conversation into those spaces, because I think it's something that there's a lot of people who are just like me, and I say that a lot. Like, everybody has their obstacles, um, and mine will look different than theirs, and theirs, will look different from other people's as well. But whatever it is that we're kind of moving forward with, but I encourage people, because we were told in the past, when we we're growing up, don't talk about it. Like, don't, or if I tell people, they're going to feel sorry for me. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. And all of those things are true. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. And then people tell me that they're inspired by me, and I'm humbled by that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, I don't want to be that either. Right? I just want to be me. Um, and so it's a struggle. But I think it's really important to think about, where are we, I think a lot of times about a younger Mandolen, or a younger Kevin, and what would it look like if they had a better understanding
Mhm.
of, any kind of disability, whether it was visible or invisible, and how to integrate and have work with people not in a stigmatizing way of, oh, you're sick. Mm, okay. Don't do too much. Are you okay? Like I'm not fragile. Like you're not gonna break apart. And I get that sometimes. I'm 4'11". People think I'm a little sprite, but I do get that sometimes. And then I get other people who, tell me that somehow I grow in height when I'm animated. But it's a balance of the unknown. And because people don't have enough awareness of what do I say to somebody who's sick? How do I handle that? Um, do I support them? Is that talking down to them? And so there's this really weird um, dialogue that isn't occurring. And I want to just tell people, just start talking to us. Like ask us questions. If it crosses a line, trust us enough that we'll enforce that boundary. Trust us enough that we know how to say, hey, I don't really feel comfortable sharing that, or, well, and while also understanding, again, this is just Mandolen's story. It's not everybody else's. Other people have totally different stories that have Crohn's or dystonia or have lost a child, these kinds of things. So, not trying to like bucket people together in that either, right? Really meeting people where they're at and trying to build those developmental, robust relationships with people. I think that sense of connection is what we really need anyway.
Sure. No, I 100% agree with you. And then that some of the things that have the good things that have come from the last couple of years regarding the pandemic, and then also some of the patterns that we've got into that has the things that we have learned from going through being shut down, and how we had to learn how to run businesses and run school systems and communicate, and then how that may have also caused some of its own problems and
Right.
exasperated some things that we were already struggling with, right? I mean, for
Right.
right now I see, because I spend a lot of time similar to yourself talking about in developing emotional intelligence, and that the emotional intelligence or EQ is a stronger indicator for potentially a stronger indicator for success within the workplace, because there's an ability to work together and collaborate within teams where there's going to be fewer and fewer positions that are requiring people to work siloed and not
Right.
work in those teams. And it's hard to be innovative when you're only in the company of yourself. And and innovation is more what we need today, more than we're leaving the technology stay or age and moving more into this innovation uh, age, and so whoever is going to be able to be most innovative and collaborative and imaginative is going to then, that those are going to be offering the solutions, um, to our world problems. And so um, I'm encouraged by some of the things that you're talking about and that we're teaching it in school. I was in that time period in school. No disrespect to my professors, but there was still there's still it was I love the stories that they told. I love the
Hmm.
stories that I told. Maybe that's why I'm a therapist, I don't know, but I love the stories that they told, but we never got tested on the stories. We only got tested on certain content, and I was a great
Right.
memorizer. I could
Hmm.
memorize and regurgitate really, really well, but they didn't learn much.
Right.
I learned a lot from their stories, but I didn't necessarily learn or take away the ability to apply the content,
Right.
because it was just about putting the content into a paper or put the content on a test form, and that wasn't real helpful. Especially wasn't helpful once I started doing clinical work. Um,
I agree. I'm known to be a writing professor, a writing intensive professor, as several members of my team are, and we do a lot of reflection based papers. And I'll tell the students, you're writing for an audience of one, but it's not me. It's you. It's your education. It's your experience. It's your growth and development. Where are you taking ownership of it? Tell me how this stuff matters in your career. How can you use it? How can you apply it? Where have you applied it? where is it all just junk? And if it is, you got to make a convincing argument.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, I agree. It's a different way, but I think our, as I said, our students and our community members have been highly responsive to that type of strategy, because they find the tangibility to it. There's teeth behind that, where people can think. One of the greatest things that I can hear students say is, "I learned this in class last night, and I implemented it at work today." Um, and that was kind of my philosophy. I just knew that I had advanced in my career not through memorization, not through vocab words, but by learning how to interact with people differently than me. Because I had lived, even though I'd seen a lot of the world, I'm a baby in the family. I'm and I had been pretty sheltered. I'm pretty much an ingenue. I'm going to a private Christian college, pretty much just reinforced all that for me. So I walked out into the world with really big eyes to say, "Hey world, I want to learn from you. I want to help and develop you as best I can." And it really came about with just trying to build connections with people, trying to be authentic, trying to be transparent. I don't always get that right. I try really hard. There are some days, my question every day when I go to bed is, am I proud of the woman I presented myself to be today?
Mhm.
And sometimes the answer is no. And so I'm like, oh, got to do damage control tomorrow. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's growth is not linear, right?
True. True. It's because of a combination of different things. One was I started reading. A friend of mine introduced me to Ryan Holiday's work, with his
Mhm.
books, "The Obstacle's the Way," and "The Ego's the Enemy," and "Stillness is the Key."
Yep.
And then I had an accident when I was hiking, and which forced an emergency, to be airlift or to be taken off the mountain, and repaired a quadricep tendon that was ruptured. And I knew that that night when I was in the hotel with my son, that I probably needed to start rereading "The Obstacle's the Way," because it appeared that I had an obstacle. And little did I know that that was then going to be the foundation for part two of my suicide prevention program, and then is probably the workshop that I do more now than I do anything else, is about developing resilience. And now there's another segment that I started doing a deeper dive into Viktor Frankl's work.
Yeah.
And that remind he what you've been talking about today reminds me of Frankl's work regarding that in the midst of suffering, if we similar to Simon Sinek's work about, if we in the midst of suffering understand what our why is, we'll be
Mhm.
able to endure, um, uh, uh, we'll be able to endure the how.
Yeah.
And being able to, and I guess that's one of the things, and so I'm throwing it out there, that's one of the things that I'm wrestling with right now, is that I understand that in theory, and I understand that developing your meaning comes from action. It isn't by sitting and contemplating about it, but I haven't figured out from a standpoint of, how do you go about instituting that in the educational system? How do you bring that into at the primary and secondary school level, about that, if there's the beginning of inviting our students to look into their own meaning within their experience versus just trying to get through it or avoid the hardship. I know how to talk about it, but I haven't figured out application for it yet.
Yeah, I keep going back to this quote by Julius Caesar that said, "It is easier to find men willing to volunteer to die than to endure pain with patience."
Mm,
And that resonated with me so much because I thought about the fact that if you've ever watched a movie that ends in a cliffhanger, how ticked off we get. Like, we didn't care if it would have been a crappy ending, but the fact that it just left us like this, that we're like, what? And we
yeah.
lose our mind. When we have that friend that gives us like juicy gossip and then just finishes, doesn't finish the story, we demand some type of ending. We crave it. We want to hear the end of that song. We want to hear the end of the story. Whatever it might be, we need some kind of denouement. And so when we don't get it, we get pretty feisty. And so what unfortunately that's built in is this discomfort of being in the middle, of being in between, of really growing in the process. And so I think with our students, it's getting them to learn to be more comfortable in that middle, and
Mhm.
understanding that if you push this to have some kind of conclusion, you push it to have some kind of finished, and you're going to get an ending, but it may not be the one you want.
Mhm.
And if you can sit here and say, where am I growing? Where am I developing? What is this moment, this time supposed to be teaching me? Where can I expand this more? Then you start to realize just how robust you are growing. We only grow linearly when we're trying to reach an ending. And that's the problem with a lot of the metrics that we're using these
Yep.
days.
Yep.
But we can grow dynamically when we sit there in that discomfort and the in between. We can learn so much about ourselves, about our environment, about other people. Um, when we just dial it back. We Sheryl Sandberg talked about that lean in, lean in. We really all bought it. I certainly did. I'm talking a lot more these days about leaning out, lean out. And in that Stillness is the Key is a phenomenal book. I know he's got a new book coming out. I just pre-ordered it on discipline.
Mhm.
And he also Courage is Calling is a phenomenal book. And I think it takes courage to be uncomfortable in that waiting.
Yeah.
We try to fill the gap of waiting all the time. I mean, I was at the doctor's office this morning and I wanted so badly to grab that phone. And Simon Sinek talks about this too, that like just sit there for a second. Just wait.
Yeah.
Just be.
Yeah.
And we don't do that enough. And the more that we can do that, the more that we can really dial into what is the meaning of these things. But unfortunately, I think we're up against some kind of confining structures there, because we really have put people in this continuing forward momentum to hit these metrics every 8-week report cards or 6-week report cards, those kinds of things, progress reports coming out. So there's always that metric that they're looking for without just trying to find the meaning. So we've got
Yeah.
to break away from the metric,
Yeah. No, I
or at
agree.
least align the metrics to the meaning.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, exactly. That's what I was just thinking when you said that, is that finding a way, because we're never going to get 100% away from the metrics because it's too built in, and there's some benefit to it because
Right.
there's accountability. But how do we figure out how to use more more relevant tools to actually measure learning, not, or measuring that growth that you're talking about, because I know for me, there's a lot of pressure in the therapeutic and behavioral health world about how to measure the transformational process of therapy. Really?
Right.
Really? There's
Yeah,
an,
I know.
it's not like measuring a surgery on to repair a knee. It's not, it's not the
Right.
same, it's not the same therapy. It's not the same type of thing. And our hearts, metaphorically, our soul is not on the same physical timeline as muscle and tendons and ligaments. And so but that is the world how we see things. So I think the innovation and creativity is going to come in. How do we figure out how to measure that, but measure it, as Seneca would talk, how do you measure it in an infinite way versus a finite way?
Right.
You-
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things about that finding the meaning with I have a friend recently. I was talking to some nurses, and they were talking about, in the healthcare industry, they were all hitting their metrics, but everybody was burnout, right? Everybody was still hitting their metrics, things were getting done. And I was talking to a friend about it, and he said, then they're not winning. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, if they're hitting their metrics, whatever it is that they're being measured on doesn't feel like victory to them. Because if they're still burned out, he said, winning teams don't feel burned out. Like, winning teams, if they feel like it's measured in their currency and the things that make them go, they don't feel deprived and drained like that.
Mhm.
And he said, so you've got a misalignment of
Yeah.
what it is that you think is meaningful versus what they think is meaningful. And I think you're exactly right. Where are we trying to get that back into place? I'm a quantitative methodologist, so I'm a big stats nerd. So I do love my metrics, but I really think alignment is incredibly important, and we forget to have those conversations about what's meaningful to you. I don't get to tell you what's valuable to you, but
Mhm.
I do have to, as a leader, ask what that value is from you.
Yep.
How
Yep.
can I, how can I, and then how can I craft that and support it better for you? Yeah.
Yep. Well, and I think I do at the beginning of the year, is I ask my therapist what is their goal that they want to, in January, what do they want to see that they did come next January. So in January
Right.
of 22, they set goals for what they want to say that they've done and achieved or accomplished or experienced or whatever by January 23. And they know that I'll come and ask them, the following year, I'll ask them that question. Um, and
Right.
on my part as a leader, it's important for me to be accountable to myself, to be accountable to them. If I ask the question in January, that I'll do a follow-up in December.
Right.
Um, so, Madeline, I could probably talk with you about this topic, and next thing you know, we're going to be doing one of those 3-hour podcasts. So, I
I
do need,
know.
yeah. So I enjoy everything that you're doing, enjoying your story. I think, without a doubt, even if you wouldn't have had these setbacks in your life, I think you probably would be doing the work that you're doing anyways. But I think that because of the setbacks you probably have even a deeper conviction, about what you're doing, and why you're doing what you're doing. And I think you're doing, it sounds like you're doing amazing work. I'm even more intrigued to learn and follow what you'll be doing. And I appreciate you being on the journey, because as people are listening, this is, I believe, exactly what people need to hear, is that we're going to have setbacks, and we're all going to have our story that we have to, the story that we have to create, and the one that we're writing. And setbacks are part of that, but it's most importantly, what are we going to do with it, and how are we not going to let those setbacks define us. So, again, Madeline, thank you very much. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you or reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I would say I'm all over social media. Primarily LinkedIn's probably the best, but I'm also at mandolenmull@gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, Madeline, once again, thank you for being with us, and all of good fortune as you move into this particular new school year, with your students this year. So, um,
Thank you so very much.
you are welcome. Uh, as as with having Madeline on the show today, as she's talked about her setbacks, um, if there is someone that you think may benefit from hearing her story and listening to her energy about what she is doing with her work and her life, please share it. Please, pass that along. And if there is some type of comment that you want to share with Madeline, please reach out to her either on LinkedIn or Facebook, or reach out to her through email. As always, thank you for being with us, and I look forward to being with you next week.